Let us get started with the secure synopsis of 30th December 2020. Secure synopsis 13th of May 2021 General Studies 1. The topic under this is Government Policies and Intervention for Development in Various Sectors and Issues Arising out of their Design and Implementation. Discuss the need to relook at the imprisonment policy practices in India while explaining the significance of open prison system in India. So this talks about the prisons. For the first time, we are talking about prisons. All this while we were talking about the number of under trials and prisoners. Right now, we are talking about the prison system in itself. If overcrowding of prisons has been a perennial problem in this country, high occupancy levels can only mean bad news amidst a pandemic. The Supreme Court has been intervening from time to time to address this problem, but its latest order directing the interim release of eligible prisoners acquires salience in view of the uncontrolled second surge in the raging pandemic. So this clearly highlights that there is huge amount of occupancy levels, and it is leading to overcrowding of prisons, which means we do not have enough prisons. And even if we have prisons, there is not enough space to accommodate a lot of people because populations has increased and lot number of crimes have increased, but the number of prisons have not increased. So let's go to the background. Imprisonment practices and pandemic. A total of 1,341 prisons were functional in India as on 30th November 2018. The total population of prisoners in India was 4.68 lakh against total sanctioned strength of 3.83 lakh, which is almost 1 lakh extra. From 2016 to 2018, the total prison population in India has increased by 8.2% against an increase of 0.7% in the prison sanction capacity. 7 states, namely Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Uttarakhand, Sikkim, Meghalaya, and Delhi, have an occupancy rate of 150%. Last year, the court had passed such an order quite early. The one of March 23, 2020 came even before the nationwide lockdown. The court had then ordered all states to take preventive steps as well as constitute high-powered committees to determine the class of prisoners who could be released on bail or parole for a specified period. In directing this week that besides identifying more prisoners for release, the same set of prisoners be given parole this year too. The court continues its trend of seeking to protect prisoners as well as those guarding them from getting infected. So right now, a lot of them are getting infected while staying within the prison. So that's what the courts have been taken into consideration. That they are probably taking the preventive steps to decongest the prisons. Open prison system in India. An open prison is also called as a minimum security prison. Open camp or prison without bars is open in four respects. Open to prisoners, inmates can go out during the day but have to come back in the evening. Open in security, there is absence of precautions against escape such as walls, bars, locks, and armed guards. Open in organization, working is based on inmates' sense of self-responsibility, self-discipline, and self-confidence. Open to public, people can visit the prison and meet prisoners. In India, the first open prison was started in 1945 in Bombay Presidency and in Uttar Pradesh after independence. 17 states are reported to have about 69 functional open jails housing around 6,000 inmates, with Rajasthan having 29 such prisons, the highest that any state has. Recently, India's first all-women's open jail was opened in Pune, Maharashtra, which is a fantastic move because the more you try to confine people, the more they want to go out of it. And if you are giving out them freedom to actually reside in these kind of prisons, mostly the crime can be extremely less, and only a proper analysis can give us a clear picture about this policy. Now, what's the significance of open prison systems? It reduces overcrowding, as the occupancy rate in jails was observed to be around 117.4% till December 2014. In wake of pandemic, this will make way for social distancing among those who have finished their term or are under trial for lesser crimes. Rehabilitative approach. Open prison reward good behavior and gives them training in self-reliance, those providing a shift from retributive to rehabilitative approach, right? It's mostly giving good behavior to them. Economic benefit. They can also provide dependable permanent labor for public work such as dam construction, road building, simultaneously providing income to the inmates. So most of them would be still contributing to the nation's economy in terms of construction work. Psychological benefits. Openness and freedom in these prisons prevent frustrations, create hope among long-term prison mates, and provides a positive self-esteem, lesser insecurity and guilt, a better adjustment to personal problems, and more cooperative attitude towards inmates and authorities. Skill training. They can provide training in agriculture, industry, or any other occasional training so that they can find suitable employment after they are released after their term. Suitability for release. They are helpful in examining the suitability of releasing offenders from prisons before the end of their prison term. Lesser construction and operational costs than traditional jail system, as they are relatively easier to construct and maintain, because you just need few walls, and you don't need a massive amount of protection the way a prison actually looks. If you have a look at the Rohini jail in Delhi, you will be scared to death. Let's move on to the next question. Evaluate the key lessons that India can learn from the recent Ladakh crisis with China. And this comes under the topic called India and its neighborhood with relations. After over a year, the standoff between Indian and Chinese troops in eastern Ladakh shows no signs of resolution. Still, the fight is going on between them. Disengagement has stalled. China continues to reinforce its troops, and talks have been fruitless. Now, let's get back to the background. In the past few years, India China relations have gone through a tumultuous phase, which include a series of disputes between the two countries, including the Doklam standoff, Beijing's shielding to Pakistan, and India's principled and consistent stand at CPEC, that is, a China Pakistan Economic Corridor. On the other hand, India's acceptance of the US's concept of the Indo Pacific and revival of the Quad reflects the state of decline in Sino India relationships. So you have a Pakistan here, you have a China here. Both of them have become friends and have been consistently involving each other in development activities in Gilgit-Baltistan and other areas. And you have, on the other hand, India and its close ally with United States and its and accepting the concept of Indo-Pacific and the revival of Quad. So both the countries are devising their own strategies to actually fight it out and posture a strong, posture against each other. Now, Ladakh crisis and Galwan clash, the standoff between India and China on the banks of Pangong Tso, and the massive buildup of Chinese troops on the other side of the LAC indicated a shift in policy from an inch by inch intrusion to an all out aggressive posturing. Infrastructure development along the LAC. In the past decade, India has worked hard to strengthen its position on the border and its presence along the LAC. India is close to completing a major upgrade of border roads, including a strategic military use road that connects an airfield at Daulat Beg Oldi in the northern tip of the western sector with the villages of Shok and Darbuk towards the south. Completed in 2019, this Daulat, Darbuk Shok, Daulat Beg Oldi road greatly facilitates the lateral movement of Indian forces along the western sector, reducing time travel by 40%, which is a fantastically, put forward move of having this road over there. Chinese dominance and deterrence posture in the DBO sector, that is Daulat Beg Oldi sector, is an effort by the PLA to prevent India from executing its plan for rapid border infrastructure development. It will significantly improve India's capacity to rapidly deploy in the area near the LAC in Ladakh. This prospect worries China. Since the border has never been clearly demarcated, it leads to contested perspectives. Now, what are the lessons that we can learn for India from Ladakh crisis? Indian military's high watermark in the crisis was an act of denial. Its occupation of the heights on the Kailash range on its side of the LAC in late August. This action served to deny that key terrain to the Chinese People's Liberation Army and gave the Indian Army a stronger defensive position from which it could credibly defend a larger segment of its front line. A doctrinal focus on denial will give the Indian military greater capacity to thwart future land grabs across the LAC. By bolstering India's defensive position rather than launching an escalatory response, such a strategy is also more likely than punishment to preserve crisis stability. Over time, improved denial capabilities may allow India to reduce the resource drain of the increased militarization of LAC, right? So a lot of people being deployed at LAC, it actually takes away a lot of energy of the soldiers, which is absolutely necessity in a time of crisis. So India cannot just waste its resources near the militarization of the LAC. The second key lesson of Ladakh is that China is more likely to be deterred or coerced with the threat of political costs rather than material costs. Admittedly, Chinese military's deployment to the LAC was also large and extremely expensive, because material is not a matter for China, but politically it is the biggest threat. In contrast, India successfully raised the risks of the rises of China through its threat of political rupture, not military punishment. A permanently hostile India or an accidental escalation to conflict were risks that China, having achieved its tactical goals in the crisis, assessed were an unnecessary additional burden while it was contending with the instability of its territorial disputes and pandemic response. The corollary lesson is that individual powers, even large powers such as India, will probably struggle to shift Beijing's calculus alone. To the extent that China adjusted its position in the Ladakh crisis, it did so because it was responding to the cumulative effect of multiple pressure points, most of which were out of India's control. Against the rising behemoth, only coordinated or collective action is likely to be effective. Finally, and possibly the hardest to address, is that India should consider accepting more risk on the LAC in exchange for long term leverage and influence in the Indian Ocean region. From the perspective of long term strategic competition, the future of the Indian Ocean region is more consequential and more uncertain than the Himalayan frontier. Let's conclude it. The Ladakh crisis, by prompting an increased militarization of the LAC, may prompt India to defer long over to military modernization and maritime expansion into the Indian Ocean. To keep its eye on the prize, New Delhi will have to make tough minded strategic trade offs, deliberately prioritizing military modernization and joint force projection over the ground centric combat arms formulations required to defend territory. Let's move on to the next topic, and it is about issues relating to development and management of social sectors, services relating to health, education, and human resources. And also, let's move on to the disaster and disaster management part of it. The National Task Force created by the Apex Code can shape the response to pandemic and future public health challenge. Comment. In the wake of the oxygen supply crisis and COVID 19 management in India, the Supreme Court has set up a 12-member national task force to guide inter alia the central government allocation of medical oxygen to the states, which means the Supreme Court has become a judicial activist by setting up this national task force to help the government and other people. About National Task Force, the task force will work with the senior officials of the Niti Aayog, the Ministry of Home Affairs, and Department of Promotion of Industry and International Trade, as well as All India Institute of Medical Sciences, the Indian Council of Medical Research, and Directorate General of Health Services. The Supreme Court has also mandated that the task force may constitute more subgroups on specialized areas or regions to assist in its work and also to consider, if appropriate, seeking the assistance of experts both within and outside our government in areas such as critical care, infectious disease modeling, clinical virology, immunology, and epidemiology, public health. The rationale for setting up the task force has been to facilitate a public health response to the pandemic based on scientific and specialized domain knowledge. It is hoped that the establishment of the NTF will help the decision makers with inputs that can enable them to go beyond ad hoc solutions to the unprecedented challenge. So this task force has a lot of tasks cut out, and it is going to be assisting in a lot of work such as virology, immunology, disease modeling, and a lot of things. So potential of task force in pandemic response: how can we utilize a task force during a pandemic? In the 12-point terms of reference of the NTF, that is the National Task Force, the first 5 points focus on oxygen supply, including deciding on a methodology for the scientific allocation of oxygen to states and facilitating audits of oxygen supply, distribution, and utilization by subgroups within each state and UTs. The task force will also review and suggest measures necessary for ensuring the availability of essential drugs and medicines. The remaining six terms of reference of the NTF are aimed at the broader pandemic preparedness and response, which include planning and adopting remedial measures to ensure preparedness for present and future emergencies. To facilitate the use of technology, to suggest augmenting the availability of trained doctors, nurses, and paramedical staff, to promote evidence based research and enhance effective response to the pandemic, facilitate sharing of best practices across the nation to promote knowledge about management of the pandemic, and to make recommendations in regard to other issues of pressing national concerns. The tenure of the task force shall be 6 months initially. The Supreme Court's order to set up the task force is highly significant, considering that India is struggling to mount an effective response to the second wave of pandemic. It ensures that the participation of independent subject experts in policy decisions, which have often been criticized as being overly led by techno-bureaucratic process. So right now, what we need from the government is enough information about the vaccines, about its policies and priorities, and its decisions, the life-saving critical decisions that it has taken so far, and it has to be given out to the policymakers so that they can give good enough amount of feedback using this national task force. In the conclusion, the decisions and recommendations of this national task force and how they co-opt members with the right expertise will determine whether India ends up becoming a medicalized care system which would focus on treating sick, or a healthcare system which can keep people healthy and respond to future epidemics and pandemics. Let's move on to the next topic: bilateral, regional, and global groupings and agreements involving India or affecting India's interests. The EU and India partnership has been slow moving and fragmented, struggling to maintain momentum, identify and explain the challenges and opportunities in India EU relationship. So, this is a question about India and EU relationship. Let's have a look at the certain circumstances in which both of them are operating right now. Today's changed circumstances provide the two sides with a new set of opportunities to move forward on the long-stalled agenda of stronger ties between India and European Union. Especially during the pandemic times, we have a lot of tasks cut out to improve our ties. What is a recent development? The 3 points. It has been a long road from the first European Union India summit in 2002, 2000 To the virtual India EU leaders meeting in 2021, which saw Prime Minister Modi interacting with 27 EU leaders as well as presidents of the European Union Council and European Commission last week. The optics could not have been better. This was a special privilege accorded to the Indian Prime Minister to underline a new sense of urgency in the EU to get its India policy right. From New Delhi's perspective, this is also an inflection point on the way it is thinking about its foreign policy priorities. Opportunities for stronger India EU ties. The EU wants to pivot away from China. It recently signed a comprehensive agreement on investment with China, which has drawn a lot of flake, and its ratification has now been suspended because of diplomatic tensions. The European Parliament remains overwhelmingly opposed to this deal after China imposed sanctions on some of its members in response to the EU imposing sanctions against China for its treatment of Uyghur Muslim minority in the Xinjiang region. With the EU being India's largest trading partner and the second largest export destination, the economic logic of strong India EU economic relations is self evident. The virtual summit saw India and EU launching an ambitious connectivity partnership in digital, energy, transport, and people to people sectors, enabling the two to pursue sustainable joint projects in a region spanning from Africa, Central Asia to the wider Indo Pacific. Exports to EU. India has an untapped export potential of $39 billion in the EU. Western Europe, the top products with export potential include apparel, gems, and jewelry, chemicals, machinery, automobile, pharmaceuticals, and plastic. India benefits from tariff preferences under the EU generalized system of preferences for several of these products. In fact, India is among the major beneficiaries of the EU's GSP, with exports under the GSP value at about nearly $19.4 billion in 2019, accounting for nearly 37% of India's merchandise exports to the EU. New emerging world order after COVID-19, as EU seeks to move away from a global supply chain that is overly dependent on China, India can emerge as its most natural ally. What are the concerns between India and EU? First is stalled EU India BTIA. It is being negotiated since 2007, and both sides have major differences on crucial issues such as EU's demands, significant duty cuts in automobiles, tax reduction on wine, spirits, etc., strong intellectual property regime, relaxation in India's data localization norms, protection to all its items with geographical indications, and all of these things. And India's demands are data secure status, important for India's IT sector, ease norms on temporary movement of skilled workers, relaxation of sanitary and phytosanitary and technical barriers to trade norms, etc. Trade imbalance. India accounts for only 1.9% of EU total trade in goods in 2019, well behind China. Trade imbalance is expected to further increase with ratification of the European Union Vietnam Free Trade Agreement and the EU Vietnam Investment Protection Agreement, which will make Indian exports less competitive. India's perception of EU, it views EU primarily as a trade bloc, preferring bilateral partnerships with member states for all political and security matters. This is evident from lack of substantive agreements on matters such as regional security and connectivity. Brexit, it is unclear how UK's withdrawal from EU will affect India's relation with EU as a whole. Human rights concerns of EU, the European Parliament was critical of both the Indian government's decision to scrap Jammu and Kashmir's special status in 2019 and Citizenship Amendment Act. Let's move on to what is the way forward between India and EU. To translate their common values into common action, EU and India can work in third countries to consolidate democratic processes and build capacities of transitioning regimes through strengthening electoral and parliamentary institutions. You can collaborate with India to facilitate connectivity and infrastructure projects in third countries, particularly smaller states in South Asia that often fall prey to power politics and fiscal instability resulting from China's loans and political influence as part of its BRI. Thus, as highlighted by EU strategy on India adopted in 2018, India EU should take their relations beyond trade lines, recognizing their important geopolitical strategic convergences. General Studies 3, Indian Economy and Issues Relating to Planning, Mobilization of Resources, Growth, Development, and Employment. Compare and contrast India's growth crisis of 1991 and 2021. How is 2021 different from the earlier one? Elaborate. So, this year marks 30 years of the landmark economic reforms that permanently altered the production and distribution structures of the Indian economy. Swayed by the success of the 1991 reforms, albeit at the macroeconomic level, there has been a growing clamor from economic commentators for more doses of reforms in 2021. India's growth crisis in 1991 versus 2021, both 1991 and 2021 have one thing in common, that is, an economy facing a severe growth crisis. The character and consequences of the crisis of 1991 1991 and 2021 are different. In 1991, the crisis of the economy was the product of endogenous factors, that is, factors which were operating within the economic system. The crisis of 2021 is different as it is the product of a pandemic which is exogenous to the economic system. The cause and effect relations are entirely different in the latter, as the cause originates from outside the economic system, and if economy is forced to adjust to this external shock. Further, in 1991, the crisis was limited to the Indian economy, while the present calamity has engulfed most global economies with varying intensities. This makes policy responses very challenging. In the former case, we could have India specific policies, assuming that there would not be drastic changes in the rest of the world, while in the latter case, India specific policies have to be tempered with the dynamics of the rest of the world, as all affected economies are formulating policy responses at the same time. So, what are the measures to recover from this crisis? Investment centered approach. The NSO has given the investment rate in the economy for FY 2020 at only 31% of GDP, which is a very low rate of investment for any economy as large as India. Therefore, investment is the right way forward. In FY 2021-2022 should be the year of beefing up, strengthening, and stepping up the pace of investment in infrastructure and many other projects where India is in the deficit stage. Managing the elevated inflation levels, India is at the risk of inflation. It is an elevated level, and that is why RBI has been very conservative about it. India has to walk on a very fine balance right now, and RBI has also adopted a policy to support economic growth and has given trying to give advances to the states too. The role of government policies, we have Atmanirbhar Bharat that was launched in 2020, and it has freed up a lot of sectors from the government regulations. Vaccination and COVID appropriate behavior. India's vaccination program is also going on. It is vaccinating nearly 3 to 4 million people on a daily basis, but that is not enough. Even after vaccination, no leniency shall be there in the following the basic COVID protocols. What's the conclusion? All crises do not inevitably lead to possibilities for reforms, even though some do create opportunities for fundamental changes. There are three clusters of actors who are crucial agents in policy process: political leaders, policymakers, and implementers. The relevant stakeholders need to have a shared vision. Into the 2021, the call for reforms leaves out the stakeholders, which might undermine the very purpose of reforms itself. Conservation, environmental pollution, and degradation, environmental impact assessment. The Bhima Bamboo can be an excellent choice for making the earth greener and mitigating climate change. Elucidate. In this era of global warming and climate change, it is imperative for humanity to take earnest measures for mitigating human made disasters. Bhima or Bhima. The bamboo is a superior clone selected from Bambusa balcoa, a higher biomass yielding bamboo species. This bamboo clone has been developed by the conventional breeding method. Bhima bamboo has been developed by the N Bharati of Grow More Biotech Limited, the agri technology company based at Hosur, Tamil Nadu. Now, let's have a look at some of the points given here. Bhima bamboo and potential in mitigating climate change. The Tamil Nadu Agriculture University has designed an oxygen park within its premises at Coimbatore with Bhima bamboo. The species is considered to be one of the fastest growing plants. It grows 1.5 feet per day under tropical conditions. It is said to be the best carbon sink to mitigate carbon dioxide emissions. A fully grown bamboo tree may generate over 300 kilograms of oxygen annually, and it may be sufficient for one person for 1 year. A 4-year-old bamboo may absorb over 400 kgs of carbon dioxide per annum from the surrounding areas. Bamboo raised on 1 acre can sequester 80 tons of carbon dioxide annually. This clone is thornless and sterile. The plants developed through tissue culture are free from pest and disease, vigorous and superior, and they can grow in the field farm for more than 100 years without any replanting. Bima bamboo is not a product of genetically modified organisms. In this case, new comes only grow around the mother shoot, and hence it is non-invasive. Cum is the hollow stem of a grass or cereal plant, especially that bearing the flower. As it is sterile, this bamboo does not produce any seed and does not die also for several hundred years and keeps growing without death. Since the plants are produced through tissue culture, the comes grow almost solid and adapt to different soil and climatic conditions. What's the conclusion? A 2 year Bima bamboo, when planted in soil, grows at a speed of 1.5 foot per day and reaches a maximum height of 30 feet in 4 weeks. The Bima bamboo can be an excellent choice for making the earth greener and mitigating climate change. Let's move on to the last question of the day, General Studies 4, Ethics and Human Interface. The right to healthy life is a moral minimum. The right to healthy life is a moral minimum, and to find a rational basis to deny it is deeply offensive to the idea of life itself. Discuss how health cannot be held hostage to profit. Uh, Let's have a look at this answer over here. India and the world are in the middle of a huge medical disaster. Vaccines have been developed, but their rollout defies equitable distribution. Right to life is a human right. At the most developed nations that have technology to develop vaccines are denying the same right that they wrote to poor nations. Right to healthy life is a moral minimum. The enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health is one of the fundamental rights of every human being without distinction of race, religion, political belief, economic, or social condition. The right to health for all people means that everyone should have access to the health services they need when and where they need them without suffering and financial hardships. No one should get sick and die just because they are poor or because they cannot access the health services they need. Good health is also clearly determined by other basic human rights, including access to safe drinking water and sanitation, nutritious foods, adequate housing, education, and safe working conditions. The right to health also means that everyone should be entitled to control their health and body, free from violence and discrimination. When people are marginalized or vaccines face stigma or discrimination, their physical and mental health suffers. Discrimination in healthcare is unacceptable and is a major barrier to development. But when people are given the opportunity to be active participants in their own care instead of passive recipients, their human rights are respected, the outcomes are better, and health systems become more efficient. Health cannot be held hostage to profit, right? Consider the example of an infant child named Tira Kamath who suffers from spinal muscular atrophy, which is a neurological condition. The only drug for this is Zolgensma, which costs about 16 crore if it is to be imported in India. It is understandable that the drug is only cure, but what about those poor and marginalized that suffer due to this and cannot afford to buy the medicine? Should the children have no hope for life, or are their rights not upheld? Same is the case with COVID 19 vaccines being developed. India itself was denied raw materials needed to manufacture the vaccine. Moreover, poor nations have to completely depend on aid to procure vaccines. Bigger nations are hogging the vaccine supplies, completely leaving the poor nations to fend for themselves. In India, there are many cases of black marketing remdesivir, oxygen cylinders, and other drugs. It is unfortunate that people make profit out of someone else's misery. This denies right to health of a person. It is thus imperative that states, nations, and other individuals must not take advantage or hold health hostage for handful of extra arms. It goes against the principle of justice as well as human dignity. The right to highest attainable standard of health implies a clear set of legal obligations on states to ensure appropriate conditions for the enjoyment of health for all people without discrimination. The right to health is one of a set of internationally agreed human rights standards and is inseparable or indivisible, inalienable human right. Thank you so much for being part of this video. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much.